My husband's mother is a control freak who made our lives a living hell. So, I gave my husband an ultimatum. She went absolutely insane and got arrested for assaulting me when she found out. My husband is the ultimate mama's boy, and even 3 years into our marriage, he gossips to her about every one of our problems. If we have a disagreement about the dirty dishes, he calls her to complain about me. If we disagree on what movie to watch, he calls her so she can convince me to go with his suggestion. However, this isn't the worst of it. He asks his mom for permission to do things. If we have a date night planned, he calls her to ask if he can go out. Last week, she told him that it was too late to go to a restaurant with me at 9 p.m. He listened to her and canceled the reservation. She calls him at 10:30 on the dot every night to tell him that it's bedtime, and he religiously listens to her, even if going to bed interrupts what we're doing. I used to confront him about this, but instead of responding to me, he would call his mom and ask her to explain to me why their relationship is the way it is. The one time I convinced him to try and put his foot down, he called his mom. Then, 20 minutes later, he came back into the room and started berating me for trying to manipulate and control him. I feel as if specific examples are needed to really understand how insane his mother is. When Max and I were dating, we were planning a weekend getaway. Something romantic, just for the two of us. I was excited, imagining a cozy cabin in the mountains where we could enjoy some much-needed alone time. But before we even finalized the details, Max said he needed to check with his mom first. I laughed it off at the time. I figured he was just being considerate. Maybe she was protective because he's her only child, I thought. But then he actually called her to ask if we could stay at the cabin. She told him no. Apparently, it was way too dangerous, and her precious boy wasn't used to being so far away from her. He took her word on it and told me we couldn't go. I asked him if he even wanted to go himself, and he shrugged. He said it didn't matter whether or not he wanted to. His mother said no, and that was all there was to it. We ended up staying at my house for the getaway since it was the only place his mother deemed safe. That was a huge red flag, and I wish I had not ignored it. While we were dating, there were countless times during our dates when his mother would call him, sometimes more than once, to check in or remind him of something trivial like taking his vitamins or avoiding certain foods. I brushed it off as quirky, thinking that once we were married, he'd set boundaries and she'd back off. But here we are, years into our marriage, and nothing has changed. If anything, Karen is even more overbearing than before. Things came to a head on our anniversary. It was our 3rd wedding anniversary, and I had planned a romantic evening for us. Dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date, followed by a night at a cozy little B&B just outside of town. I was so excited to surprise him. But when I got home, Max wasn't there. I called him and quickly realized he had forgotten our anniversary. He was out having dinner with his mom because she had a rough day and needed company. When Max finally came home, I was furious. Our anniversary was supposed to be special, something just for the two of us. I tried to explain how much this day meant to me. I didn't want to spend our anniversary in a shouting match, but that's exactly where we ended up. I was fed up, not just with the forgotten anniversary, but with everything. The anniversary, his mother's interference, and his inability to see how it was tearing us apart. I could see him growing defensive, and it felt like the same pattern repeating itself, where he'd find a way to justify her actions and leave me feeling unheard and undervalued. And after our massive fight, instead of apologizing or even trying to make things right, he did what he always does. He called his mom. I could hear him in the next room, telling her all about how unreasonable I was being, how I didn't understand their relationship, and how I was blowing things out of proportion. That was it. I snapped. I walked into the room, grabbed the phone out of his hand, and told Karen she needed to stop interfering in our marriage. If she wanted to boss someone around, she should find her own man. Karen, of course, was ticked off. She said I was just jealous of their close relationship and that I was trying to come between them. We had a huge argument right there on the phone, with Max standing between us, looking like a deer caught in headlights. But Karen wasn't just angry. She was vindictive. The next day, she showed up at our house unannounced. She didn't even bother knocking. She just walked in like she owned the place. She acted like nothing had happened and claimed she was just visiting us. Then, at dinner, she started criticizing the way I cooked. I had spent the entire afternoon making one of Max's favorite dishes, spicy chicken curry. I knew he loved it with an extra kick, and I was excited to serve it to him. As we all sat at the table, I watched Karen take her first bite. Her face immediately tightened. She put her fork down, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin, as if the food had personally offended her. I asked her if everything was okay, and she sighed dramatically before saying, "The food is just too spicy. You should tone it down." Then, she turned to Max and said, "I don't know how you can eat something like this. Spicy food isn't good for your stomach, you know." Max shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly torn. Then, like the spineless man-child he is, he suggested we order takeout to make everyone happy. But I didn't want takeout. I had spent hours cooking. Karen refused to eat another bite. She pushed her plate away and whined that she needed something else to eat because my cooking was too much for her delicate stomach. She made it very clear that she wasn't eating my curry. I had never wanted to throw a plate of food at someone so badly in my life. The following week, she invited Max to a coffee shop out of the blue to spend time together. The problem? Max and I had already made plans. Max told her he could meet her after our date. But, of course, she was persistent. She told him to bring me along, saying, "It's been too long since we've spent mother-son time together." I knew this wasn't about seeing me. She wanted to ruin our plans. When we arrived at the coffee shop, Karen was already seated. She greeted Max warmly and barely acknowledged me as I slid into the seat next to him. I could feel her eyes scanning me from head to toe. I wore a simple sundress and sandals, nothing unusual. But then Karen smirked and said, "Well, isn't that an interesting choice? Not many people would dare to wear something like that nowadays. But you don't care about standing out, do you?" I forced a tight smile, trying to brush it off. The cashier, who had overheard, chuckled awkwardly as she handed us our drinks. But Karen wasn't done. She gestured toward a group of well-dressed women sitting by the window and sighed dramatically. "Now look at that. That's what you call chic. It's nice to see some people still know how to dress for the occasion. Don't you think?" she said, loudly enough for the whole cafe to hear. I could feel my face heating up with embarrassment. Max, once again, just sat there, avoiding eye contact with me while his mother humiliated me in public. As time went on, it felt like Karen was trying to push me out of my own relationship and take over as the woman of the house. I tried to stand up for myself, but Max would always take his mother's side. Every single time. "She's just trying to help," he'd say. "You know she means well," he'd insist. I was so tired of hearing those excuses. The weeks went by, and Karen's intrusions only got worse. It wasn't just about controlling Max anymore. She was now targeting me directly. At first, it was subtle. One evening, during one of her many visits, she casually mentioned that Max should be eating more vegetables. Then, she not so subtly suggested that I start cooking healthier meals for him. "You know, Max used to love my spinach casserole," she said with a smug smile. The implication was clear. I wasn't feeding him properly, and it was my responsibility to fix it. Then she escalated. One night, I was getting ready for date night with Max when Karen unexpectedly dropped by. She took one look at my outfit and pursed her lips. "Is that what you're wearing?" she asked. Not really a question. More like a judgment wrapped in fake politeness. She then suggested I wear something more appropriate, something classy and conservative. I stood there, staring at myself in the mirror, suddenly second-guessing my choice, and I hated myself for it. But the final straw came one night when Karen stayed over after dinner. We were saying our goodnights when she casually mentioned, "Max always performs best at work when he gets at least 8 hours of sleep. You both should be in bed by 10. And she said it like it was a rule, like she was in charge. I had to hold myself back from laughing in her face. She was literally dictating our bedtime like we were children. I dreaded her visits. I knew they would come with another round of criticisms, backhanded compliments, and manipulative suggestions. It was like living with a dictator. And the worst part? Max didn't see anything wrong with it. To him, his mom was just caring and concerned. But I knew better. She was trying to control every aspect of our lives. And I was done. Had reached my breaking point. I told Max straight up he needed to choose, me or his mother. I didn't want to issue an ultimatum, but I couldn't live like this anymore. I married him, not her, and I wasn't going to stay in a marriage where his mother had more power over our lives than I did. Max was devastated. He begged me to reconsider, tried to convince me that we could all get along, that I just needed to be more understanding. But I had been understanding for years, and all it had done was give Karen more control. I stood firm. Either he set real boundaries with his mother or I was done. Max finally agreed to talk to Karen, but the moment he did, all hell broke loose. Karen lost it. She screamed at him, saying no wife should ever come before a mother, that I was poisoning him against her. She even threatened to cut him off if he dared to choose me over her. And just like always, Max was torn. He was stuck between the two women in his life, and it was tearing him apart. But for the first time, I didn't care. I was tired of competing with his mother for his love and loyalty. I was his wife, for God's sake. This shouldn't even be a debate. Karen didn't stop there. Oh no, she was determined to make me the villain. She started spreading lies about me to our friends and family, claiming that I was the one trying to break up the family. She told people I was controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive to Max. She even called my work, yes, my actual job, and made false complaints about me. I had no idea what she said, but I was suddenly called into my boss's office and told that there had been concerning reports about my behavior. Reports? What reports? I had never had any issues at work. But my boss mentioned that a concerned family member had called in to make sure I was performing well. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. Because of Karen, I was forced to take a mandatory workplace conduct course. A humiliating punishment for something I didn't even do. She was actively trying to sabotage my career. That was the final straw. I had to take drastic action. I filed for a restraining order against Karen. I didn't want to do it, but I had no other choice. When Karen found out, she completely lost it. She showed up at our house, screaming outside like a lunatic. When I refused to let her in, she forced her way through the door, shoved me, and grabbed my hair. She physically attacked me. That's when the police were called, and Karen was arrested for assault. Max was in shock. He couldn't believe how far his mother had gone. And for the first time ever, he saw what I had been dealing with all these years. He went to visit her in jail, hoping to talk some sense into her, but Karen refused to apologize. Instead, she doubled down, saying that he was making the biggest mistake of his life and that he would regret choosing me over her. But for the first time, Max saw through her manipulation. He finally realized that his mother's love came with conditions, and if he didn't obey her, he was expendable. Took him days to come to terms with it, but in the end, Max chose me. He cut his mother out of his life for good. It wasn't easy for him, and I knew it hurt, but it was the only way we could save our marriage. Karen, however, wasn't done. She tried one last stunt, posting all over Facebook about how her son had abandoned her for a manipulative woman. But by then, no one was buying her lies anymore. She had pushed too far and lost everything. Now, Max and I are finally free. Free to live our lives without her interference. Free to make our own choices. Took years of emotional warfare, but in the end, we won. And Karen? Well, she reaped what she sowed.